Good evening. I know I had to start this in the evening. I had to prepare on so many levels. YouTube audience, thank you for watching my 16th live YouTube. I have a lot to share. Make sure I don't have an echo going on. Here we go. The echo is gone. So thank you again for joining my YouTube live. This is my 16th one. Please subscribe, share, and subscribe, like, and share this with others. Because I don't talk about. I'm not your average mainstream. I'm not mainstream. I'm very independent, but I'm serious about my content. I'm an original content creator, and I have original content. So if you appreciate it and see the importance of it, the way that so many people have blessed the discourse by shifting it up, elevating it. Bless me with a Cash App. My Cash App is Rome Fraser. This is my 16th one. I've done 15 videos. Try not to take more than a half an hour of your time, but in that half an hour, I guarantee you, I give you much more high vibrational work, meditations, conversations, uh, than what you get in the mainstream. Looking at the same thing through a different angle, but through a higher vibration. I want to take the time to look out, shout out, recognize, appreciate, say thank you to the spirit. I wish I was able to have a heart to heart with her before she transitioned, but I have to shout out this amazing artist whose work really touched me. Her name is Marva Hicks. I had seen her originally in Carolina Change when I was working for WBAI Radio about 20 years ago, closer to 18 years ago. It was 2004. So, yeah, that would be about um, 16 years ago, technically. I saw her perform as the radio in Tony Kushner and Janine Tesori's musical Carolina Change. It was an amazing experience. I went with my friend Bianca, who is now a accomplished director. I'm so glad to see Bianca directing powerful, influential pieces. Chicken and Waffles was the last big thing she directed. And I remember when me and Bianca went to see this particular musical, Carolina Change. That soundtrack is incredible. It's a powerful soundtrack. And Marva Hicks, who just transitioned 2 days ago, performed the role of the radio. And the story of Carolina Change is the biographical story. It's an autobiographical piece written by Tony Kushner, who wrote Angels in America, which was highly commercially successful. And Carolina changes the story of his life growing up in Louisiana. And the story of Caroline, this musical, is his maid, his housekeeper, and her life growing up with her daughter, her son. And the radio became like a personified character in the musical because she, Caroline, Kushner's former maid, always listened to it. So Marva Hicks played the role of the radio, and what an unforgettable role Marva Hicks played. I just want to play the song that I played most often so you could hear her. She is in a three-part harmony with Ramona Keller, who sings soprano. Tracy Nicole Chapman sings alto. And Marva Hicks sings the most unforgettable uh, second alto that I've ever heard in my life. I always play this to encourage me, so I just want to let you listen to it. powerful performance. Thank you, Marva Hicks. We appreciate your amazing singing. Thank you, Marva Hicks. We appreciate your amazing singing in that song, Salty Teardrops. That was from Carolina Change. She just transitioned. Second piece I saw Marva Hicks in was in Leslie Lee's play, 2008 signature theater production of The First Breeze of Summer, which I saw with my Aunt Iona. I'll never forget going to see that performance with her. And here's a cast photo by Richard Termine of the production. Brendan Durden is on the left. Keith Randolph Smith played his father right next to him. And then in the middle is Marva Hicks. She performed his mother. His character's name is Lewis, Lewis's mother, who is Hattie. So she performed Hattie. And then when the character of Grammer, who is seated there, the dramatic, story, the dramatic turn of the story is that, she's passing and she dies. And when Marva Hicks sings that song, woo, I bawled like a baby in front of my aunt. I was so embarrassed. But shout out to Marva Hicks's voice. She has the voice of an angel. I also saw Marva Hicks in James Stovall's production of Nativity, a life story that was produced with Stephanie Mills, BB Winans, Felicia Rashad. They did it like every year, every December in Harlem. And Marva Hicks was part of that. Those are the productions I saw her in. And so many people, so many people, so many people. I also want to shout out, today's the birthday of, or the 18th, September 18th is the birthday of Jeffrey Anderson Gunter, who's been a big role model for me, a big light in my life, who's always encouraged me. We've had very powerful conversations about the Caribbean influence on Broadway. He told me about stories of Vinette Carroll, whose parents are Jamaican, and who created, uh, she created a theater that the name is slipping from me, from Vinette Carroll. I'm going to get the name right. I want to make sure I respect Vinette Carroll. Um, I'm going to Vinette Justine Carroll. She gave Cicely Tyson her first big break, and I want to get the name of her um, company correct. It's not on this Wikipedia, but I'm gonna find it. Here it is, Urban Arts Core. Thank you, Vinette Carroll, for creating Urban Arts Core, and Jeffrey Anderson Gunter for really being inspired by her. And then Andreen Bonner, the amazing playwright and dear friend of mine, told me and shared with me how it was Jeffrey Anderson Gunter that connected Tom Ian, the producer of Dreamgirls, to Sheryl Lee Ralph. And 2 weeks ago, Sheryl Lee Ralph just won her Emmy, you know, and it's like a culmination of her success that Jeffrey Anderson Gunter was very instrumental in bringing to pass. So thank you, Jeffrey Anderson Gunter. Happy birthday to you, and thank you for your work in really bringing talents together and creating the ball. There's also some beautiful photos of Jeffrey Anderson Gunter and Marva Hicks. So make sure you check out Jeffrey Anderson Gunter's IG, and his name, Jeffrey, just like it sounds, Jeffrey Anderson Gunter, Gunter. And really, Jeffrey put in my heart, somebody has to do something on Vinette Carroll. Somebody, because I hear her voice. And when I hear Felicia Rashad, for example, talk about how instrumental she was in creating like artistic energy at that time that inspired Esther Rolle, that inspired Felicia Rashad, that inspired all of these Black woman artists and male artists to go out and make a dent on the Broadway stage. And nobody's written a book like a scholarly, like a serious, not an academic book, but a scholarly, serious book on Vinette Carroll. It's like somebody has to do it. So, I mean, he lit that fire in me. Maybe I'll do it. Somebody out there who's listening to this, maybe you should do a book on Vinette Carroll because her influence is incredible. The founder of the Urban Arts Core and so many productions that trained so many of the great artists we love now, like Cicely Tyson, Felicia Rashad, Sheryl Lee Ralph, many others, many artists that we appreciate now who had some interaction with Vinette Carroll and the Urban Arts Core. So we thank her for that. And thank you, Jeffrey Anderson Gunter, for carrying the baton, from that time to the younger generation of artists like myself. Um, the knowledge and the history that you teach us is most appreciated. Thank you, Jeffrey Anderson Gunter. I also want to look at the Woman King. I was noticing, I posted an IG live today, well, yesterday, technically, because this is the early morning of the 20th of September. Yesterday, I posted an IG live about why people should not boycott the Woman King, because I was reading posts about how it should be boycotted because it shows women selling Africans to the Europeans. And what I said in my IG video is that that is part of our history that should not be censored, shut down, ignored, dismissed. It is part of our history. So I have not seen the film yet. Plan to give a more accurate, thorough review of the film after I see it. And I will. After I see it, I'll absolutely share. I look forward to seeing what exactly Viola Davis, chose to do with the story of the Woman King. If you've just watched this, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe to my YouTube. This is my 16th one. I'm getting my word out there. I don't like to announce exactly when I'm going to do it because it takes so much time. I have to be meticulous about what I'm going to say. And the images, I have to prepare the images. I have to prepare the content. So if you just notice this, comment if you hear anything I say and interact with it. Let it be meaningful. Let it add to the vibration of the conversation. So what I'm saying about the Woman King is there's a energy on social media to boycott it. And what I'm saying is don't boycott the Woman King. It's very important. These conversations about the role of Africans in selling other Africans need to be had. They need to be had. And this is not the first work to raise this question or raise this reality of Africans selling other Africans. I saw it in several places. I can't even begin. Well, I saw it in 2017 with this book, Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston. She raises that question of Africans selling other Africans. But even before that, there was the Negro World periodical, and shout out to Islaku Berhanu, the librarian at the Bloxham Collection, because Miss Berhanu emailed me an issue of the new Negro World newspaper edited by Hoyt Fuller, where one of the issues in that, not newspaper, but periodical, in the Negro Digest Black World periodical, edited by Hoyt Fuller, Ms. Berhanu emailed me an issue of the Black Aesthetic, and it was a debate between Addison Gale Jr. and then political science professor at Harvard, Martin Kilson. And Kilson and Gale was talking about whether there is a Black aesthetic. Gale was making the case for one, and I've tweeted often about the Gemini Addison Gale Jr. Marva Hicks was also a Gemini. And Kilson basically says there is no Black aesthetic because of the role that Africans played in enslaving other Africans. So they are as guilty as Europeans in the slave trade. And Addison Gale argues the opposite. He said because Africans sold other Africans and that we see that as a moral crime, there is in fact a Black aesthetic. So this debate has been going on, but in particular, what happens in Barracoon, which is an amazing story that I highly recommend. I wrote a review of it. And Zora Neale Hurston, she was one of the first editors to publish her poems was Marcus Garvey, who does not get credit for doing it. He didn't get credit in Robert Hemingway's biography of Hurston, and he didn't get credit in Christy Anderson's film called Jump at the Sun for being the first editor to take Hurston seriously. But yes, Garvey was the very first editor she had before Hurston chose to move from DC to New York. She had traveled from DC to New York to work with Marcus Garvey to publish her early poems, and Garvey was her early publisher. Within about a decade of her publishing, Garvey publishing her poems, she interviews Kosala, who was one of the last descendants um, who was able to have such a full experience and give an account of that experience in an oral form. And Zora Neale Hurston interviewed him, Kosala. Um, and what a story she tells. And his story tells the reality of Africans selling other Africans, not just Africans, but you had woman warriors, which is what Viola Davis's film is highlighting. You know, the woman warriors who participated in the slave trade. And that is exactly what Kosala in his interview with Hurston recounts. And as I said, this is not a history we should really shy from. This is part of our history. And in the IG video that I did yesterday on the 19th, I mentioned why we need to study this history, not only study it, but we can't ignore it. We can't hide it from the younger generation because that is the reality. You know, the reality is that certain Africans sold other Africans, but I'm looking particularly at the leader and the leader of the one who posts Afro Universe One, the Twitter account, and I saw him in his face, and his message was that the woman king should be boycotted, and I say absolutely not, absolutely not. Our young people really need to understand the depth of the history and how the slave trade would not have happened without the cooperation of other Africans. In this book's particular case, it was the Dahomey people who captured Africans, particularly those of the Tokoi ethnic group that Kosolo was part of. And this is a story that I narrated. The tragic story of Africans selling other Africans is something that is a part of the play that I wrote called The Original Mrs. Garvey. And when she tells the story to a younger Jamaican imprisoned woman of her great grandmother, you know, being enslaved, it's tragic. But Amy Ashwood Garvey knows the importance of telling that. She knows the importance of telling that story because she's not going to downplay and show all the Black people or all the African people as heroes or all the African people as allies. They weren't, because that's how we got here, because they chose to capture and sell other African people. It's not a pleasant history because, you know, in Deborah Plant's introduction, she mentions how heads were decapitated, and not only the heads were decapitated, they were smoked, you know, and these were heads of people that you could tell through how he was telling Hurston, you could tell that Kosala knew personally, and it was hard to see these people that he had grown up with, you know, on the head of some enemy ethnic group's chain around their neck. But that's what he saw, you know, and that is the tragedy. But it's reality. I think we do our young people a disservice when we act like war is not brutal or ugly. I think the European children who are the same age as our children right now, they're more mature on so many issues regarding war and love and sex because, you know, they have a much their intelligence is not insulted. You know, they're told, you know, this is an ugly history. It included decapitation. It included your people from your ethnic group choosing to collaborate with the enemy to to basically demoralize our culture. And that's also what happened to West African people. That's also what happened to the Tokoi people. So I say all this to say, please do not boycott the woman king. You know, it shows those sordid parts of history, but those sordid parts of history are part of what make us what we are. Those sordid part of history is what makes Amy Ashwood Garvey who she is, the incredible journalist who was able to travel how many countries, 40 plus countries, you know, that people who were born after weren't able to do, but she was able to do, you know. She was able to document Marcus Garvey's life, but also her own life for her own family, and she was able to fulfill a promise to her grandmother to go back to the place where her grandmother came from, and she does just that in December of 1946. She goes back to the place in present day Ghana where her grandmother's sister, great grandmother's sister, was sold into slavery. So kudos to her. Kudos to Amy Ashwood Garvey for knowing her history and not shying away from it, even though she knew that her own ethnic group sold her line to the Europeans. Because as my story of Amy Ashwood reveals, that helps her cope with her present struggles. And we can't know where we're going in life. We don't know where we're going in the future unless we know where we've come from. And she's clear on where we've come from. I don't believe in babying children. I don't believe in telling them that everybody was nice and held hands and got along. That's not true. You have to prepare yourself. And the other aspect about this whole idiotic idea of a boycott is there's so many people in the present day that you could tell would collude with slave traders based on their behavior now, based on their behavior right now. I don't want to start naming people, but I'm sure you know who they are. And it's like, wow, I can't believe this person is behaving like this or has this idea. If they have this idea, they must be, back in the day, they would have been the ones to sell my people, because you just see what they say and it's just foolishness. You know, I just mentioned Jeffrey Anderson Gunter, who shared with me his very strong relationship with Vinette Carroll. And it's like, it just reminds me of this whole stuff I'm seeing about FBA and is Pan-Africanism dead? I'm like, if it wasn't for Pan-Africanism, we wouldn't know about Africa. If we wouldn't know what we know about Black history. So this whole notion that Pan-Africanism is dead is a lie. And this whole notion of trying to X out people who were not generationally born in this contiguous 48 states is ludicrous and is wrong. This FBA movement that tries to X out Mexico, X out the Caribbean, X out Central America, X out South America, it's wrong. And so that kind of thinking is what the European depends on in order for the slave trade to thrive. They have to think like the European, or you have to do that to your mind before you're, psychologically okay personally with capturing people and delivering them to somebody for money. You have to justify it, and you justify it by saying these people are other than me. This group is other than me. So make sure you are clear about the importance of Pan-Africanism. Because if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't know so much that we already know today. I wanted to look at a particular section of Barracoon, and this is the introduction written by my master's thesis advisor. Her name is Dr. Deborah Plant. She's also the author of two other books about Zora Neale Hurston, as well as a biography of Alice Walker. And I'm going to see if I can expand this. This is the part where Dr. Plant writes about female soldiers. I'm going to read from the sentence that starts with Kosala described to Hurston. Kosala described, and this is the enslaved man who Hurston interviews in 1927. By that year, he's in his 80s, but his memory is very important to Hurston's generation and generations after Hurston's, because he has memory of being captured, right? And creates this Africa town in Alabama, captured by other Africans, brought in the Middle Passage, survived the Middle Passage, and then brought through the Gulf of Mexico, past Florida, to Alabama, where he creates Africa Town. So Dr. Deborah Plant is describing, putting in context, Kosala's interview with Hurston. Plant writes, Kosala described to Hurston the mayhem that ensued in the pre-dawn raid when his townspeople awoke to Dahomey female warriors. And I write a small note there about how we saw female warriors in the Marvel-inspired film called Black Panther, who slaughtered them in their days. Those who tried to escape through the 8 gates that surrounded the town were beheaded by the male warriors who were posted there. Kosala recalled the horror of seeing decapitated heads hanging hanging about the belts of the warriors, and how on the second day the warriors stripped the march in order to smoke the heads, right? Through the clouds of smoke, he missed seeing the heads of his family and townspeople. And he didn't even say which family members, but he's seeing family members' heads on stakes of the enemy that captured his people. It's easy to see how few would have looked on that single site, on that site too closely, wrote a sympathetic Hurston. And so this is the tragedy of war. This is the cost of war, but it is part of our history. It is part of how we got to uh, the West, so to speak, by African groups such as the Dahomians, working on behalf of the Europeans to capture weaker, if you will, quote unquote, weaker groups such as Kosalas. But this is part of our history. And what I was saying in my video earlier today on IG is that there are individuals in this Western world who behave just like those Dahomians who captured Kosla's tribe, except they're not doing it the way that the Dahomians do it. They do it by advancing and behaving as handkerchief head informants. And this is something Malcolm X has talked about ad nauseum when he talks about that difference between the house slave and the field slave. And so those field slaves are those who are escaping slavery, but who are instrumental to the rebellion. The house slaves behave in the manner that Kosler described of the Dahomians. They're working on behalf of the Europeans, the same way a house slave would, in terms of informing him who among the field slaves are most likely to rebel, who among the field slaves should the master trust, should the master not trust. It's the same dynamic. And that's why it is important to study how Africans sold other Africans into slavery, because we see that dynamic even after slavery. So if you appreciated this YouTube, I'm so glad you're able to join me. Please support my Cash App. It's $ my name, Ron Fraser. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my YouTube. This is my 16th one, and I'm grateful for your attention. Thank you.